All right, how's everybody doing? Good, excellent. My name is Charles Hughes. I'm the director of the Lynn and Henry Turley Memphis Center. Welcome everyone to tonight's installment of our Memphis-centered speaker series, the final event of this school year in the Memphis-centered series, and what a wonderful way to close things out. I will not take too much of your time because I know that you didn't come here to hear me talk, but I do want to just share a couple of things before introducing Dr. Cage. First of all, I want to send a couple thank yous. First of all, to the Memphis Center staff, which of course includes Dr. Cage, but tonight thinking specifically about Edith Mercado, our wonderful program coordinator, and Judy Pierce, our administrative assistant, both of those folks being so essential to the work that we all do together. Also want to thank other folks in the staff here at Rhodes, our physical plant staff, our campus safety staff, our communications staff, our custodial staff, people whose work is often unacknowledged and invisible. Sometimes it's invisible because they do it so well, and we're so fortunate here at Rhodes to have staff members who do their jobs so brilliantly. So thank you, of course, to all of them as well. I also wanted to acknowledge, as I'm trying to do at every Memphis-centered event this year, the bicentennial year of Memphis's 200th anniversary. Of course, one of the things that Memphis-centered events and the Memphis Center more broadly attempts to do is try to shine a spotlight on parts of our history or our present that may not get as much acknowledgement and yet deserve it. We're certainly going to hear some of that tonight, but I also wanted to begin by acknowledging that Memphis was founded on land that belonged to the Chickasaw Nation. The Chickasaw Nation and other indigenous folks were the first people to occupy this land and were removed as part of the process of the founding of our city. We honor them and honor that past, but also honor the continuing work being done by the Chickasaw Nation and other Native folks to remind us of that past and to work for a more just future. So I did want to acknowledge that before we go any further. Although this is the final Memphis-centered event of the semester, there will be, of course, more in the fall, and there will be other Turley Memphis Center events even outside of this particular series. To learn more about those, one of the best ways to do that is to follow us on Facebook at the Lynn and Henry Turley Memphis Center at Rhodes College. You can search in Facebook and find us that way. You're also, of course, welcome to email us or get in contact if you'd like to learn more about what we do. But Facebook is unquestionably the best way to keep up with what we are doing. A couple of reminders before we get going. First of all, please silence all phones and devices and things that buzz and beep, but do keep them out. As you can see, part of Dr. Cage's presentation will include a live poll. There's two ways to get access to that poll. If your phone has a QR scanner, you can hold it up with your camera and get a hold of that code, or you can visit that URL through one of your browsers. So even though try to silence your devices, feel free to have them out as it will be part of tonight's activity. Additionally, some of you may have already received post-it notes and other things. We are going to do Q&A tonight using those post-its because obviously there's a lot of folks here. We want to make sure that everybody has an equal shot to ask a question. So as you think of things, or even at the end if you have a thought, the wonderful Edith Mercado will be able to collect those, and we will probably not get to every question. I imagine that a lot of things will come up in this conversation, but we will get to a few, and then of course, hopefully after the event is over, we can have more time for conversation, discussion, and cookies, and other good things like that. The Memphis-centered series and the Turley Memphis Center more generally, even before the generous gift from the Turley Family Foundation when we were just the Memphis Center, was designed in part, in large part in fact, to offer a home at Rhodes College for transformative work about Memphis and about the Mid-South. We have done a lot of things over the last few years in order to try to build on that mission. We continue to do more and more. And an absolutely crucial part of that process, without which we could not do what we currently are doing and what we will be doing, a crucial element to that process was the hiring of Dr. Stephanie Cage as our inaugural Associate Director. Dr. Cage's pioneering research, which we will hear about tonight, is paired with her extensive experience and deep commitment to community-engaged education. In less than a year in this position, although her time at Rhodes preceded this position, and I know many of you know her from that wonderful phase of her work at our college, Dr. Cage, in less than a year as Associate Director, has fundamentally shifted the conversation about our college's connection to Memphis, and through her work with student fellows, her acclaimed mass incarceration course that she offers through the Urban Studies program, and other work, she has already made a transformational impact on our students and on her colleagues. Recently, her work has appeared in Boston University's Impact Journal of the Center for Interdisciplinary Teaching and Learning, a fitting publication and one that surely will be the first of many over what is unquestionably going to be a remarkable career. We are very fortunate to have her with us every day, but we're particularly fortunate to have her with us this evening. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephanie Cage.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hughes. Good evening, everybody. It's so good to see everybody out tonight. Thank you for coming. Welcome from Rhodes College. Welcome from the Lynn and Henry Turley Memphis Center. We're so glad to have you out with us tonight. Has everybody gotten a chance to either find the website or scan the QR code by chance? If not, that's fine. So we'll go ahead and get into our first live poll question. And let's just test this thing to see if it's working. Okay, all right, so we've got at least, oh, look at y'all go. Okay, good. So we have a few people who are able to get in on the poll. Okay, that's going to go forever. So let's just move on to the next question. And that question is, let us know who you are, which role best describes you here, just to get a good representation. Good, a lot of young people here. If you're having trouble accessing the link, that address is case sensitive, so you have to have a lowercase p, capital AVT. All right, good. All right, so this topic of the interrelation of education and mass incarceration spans so many different areas. But tonight, I want to focus on two key areas in particular. The first is the school to prison pipeline, which I'm sure most of you have probably already heard of up until now. We'll spend a little more time focusing on the school to prison pipeline, since this is the pathway that feeds people directly into the carceral system, in particular our young people, especially those who are at risk, directly from the classroom to the carceral system. We'll discuss the ways in which incarceration has been prioritized over education, and we'll look at the ways in which this trend has disproportionately impacted our urban youth in particular. The second area that I want to discuss tonight is the reverse. It's the prison to school pipeline. So that refers to the pathway that people who are incarcerated take through educational programs such as adult basic education, vocational education, college coursework, life skills education. So these programs can have a significant impact on the successful reentry of people returning to their communities after prison. Specifically, we'll look at students' lived educational experiences, both prior to and post-incarceration, and what barriers they have experienced in their educational experiences. As we discuss those who have been adversely impacted by the system of incarceration, recognizing and understanding the power of implicit bias is crucial to our discussion. It's important for us to know who we are in relation to whom and what we study. So my next poll question invites you to review your own personal history for just a second. And this question is, have you ever broken the law? Let me ran a stop sign, ran a red light, jaywalking. All right. So we got some saints in here, a couple of those. I played the fifth. Okay. All right. So the reason I asked this question is I want us to be aware of our own biases, in particular when we're discussing people who are either incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. So I want you guys to think of the worst thing that you've ever done. Don't tell me, I don't want to know. But just think about the worst thing that you have ever done and imagine if they were tattooed across your forehead. When we put labels on people, that's exactly what we do. And so terms like felon, convict, prisoner, inmate, all tend to have a negative connotation. They create these word picture images in your head. Like if I said car, you get one image, but if I said minivan, you get another image. If I said Lamborghini, it looks kind of different. So I want us to be mindful of that. Now, this is something that even I struggle with. And the primary reason is because it's written into our laws, right? It's written into the legal language that we use to describe people who are incarcerated. And it's become vastly normal in our society. So as we continue this discussion, I would like for you all to consider using people first language, so people who are incarcerated, people who were formerly incarcerated, and so on, okay? All right, so this is Tana Pal, and she's an author and a public speaker. These are her boys. Joa is on the left and JJ is on the right. When JJ was just 4 years old, he was suspended from preschool. He was suspended for throwing a chair. Now, he didn't hit anybody, but he did throw a chair. And so he received a one-day suspension for that. In the subsequent weeks, JJ was suspended 2 more times in the subsequent weeks. 2 months later, Tonette received a phone call to come and pick up her other son, Joa, this time, who was actually 3 years old at the time. Joa was suspended for hitting a staff member on the arm. This pattern of suspension as a disciplinary action continued throughout the school year. So JJ and Joa were suspended from preschool approximately a dozen times combined. The Powell's story is but one example of a trend that we've seen over the past 4 decades. JJ and Joa's experiences are representative of the early stages of the school to prison pipeline, the preschool to prison pipeline. So approximately 50,000 preschoolers are suspended each year, and about 17,000 are expelled each year. Now, this is just public schools. This does not include children who are suspended or expelled from private institutions. So you may say, well, Steph, there are 1 million kids in preschool. These numbers they seem to be pretty small compared to the larger group. Why is this important? This is the first introduction that they have to our education system. So when we suspend 3 to 4-year-olds, what message are we sending? When students are suspended at such a young age, especially during this developmental stage, it can create a negative relationship for them in school. And this is increasingly important because we know that there's a strong correlation between school suspensions and dropout rates. Moreover, we begin to see racial disparities in the discipline of students in early childhood education. 48% of preschoolers that are suspended are Black, but Black children only account for 18% of this particular population. While white children only account for 26% of the suspensions, they comprise 43% of the, okay. You're here now. But they comprise 43% of the total preschool population. Again, what message are we sending? Are any of my students in here? Okay, good. Thank you all for coming. They've seen this before. Some of you may have seen this before as well. But this is the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for people who were born in 2001. I'm looking around the room and I see a couple of young folks in here. So people maybe around your age, 17, 18 years of age. So for women, the expectation is that 1 in 111 people for white women are more likely to be incarcerated. For Latina women, it's 1 in 45. For Black women, it's 1 in 18. But the largest disparity that we see is between Black men and white men. For white men, it's 1 in 17. For Black men, 1 in 3 are expected to be incarcerated in their lifetime. For Latino men, the stats are slightly better than Black men, but not much, 1 in 6. So I'll take you back to the poll again for our next question. Let's see if we can get this. All right, so this is a fill-in-the-blank question. And it says, national data shows that Black students are, fill-in-the-blank, 10 times as likely, almost 4 times as likely, or twice as likely to be suspended than their white counterparts. And I'll hold for just a second as some of the answers are coming in. I think maybe some people are switching their answers. Okay. I think that's good. So, drum roll. The correct answer is almost 4 times as likely. Black students are almost 4 times as likely to be suspended as their white counterparts. Black students account for 15% of the national enrollment, but they make up 1/3 of the student arrests. The school to prison pipeline has not only disproportionately impacted Black and brown students, we also see that students with disabilities, LGBTQ+ students, students who are in foster care, and students who are experiencing homelessness are also more likely to be suspended. This pipeline uncovers a pathway of systemic racism, impoverished communities, underfunded schools, programs and systems that divert students and money from school initiatives. It diverts money away from teacher training and professional development opportunities, schools that are overcrowded, outdated institutions. And we trace this pathway all the way up to state-of-the-art modern prisons. We continue to see cuts in funding in the areas that we need it the most. Spending on prison has increased 3 times as quickly as spending on education. Art and music programs have been completely removed from the school curriculum, despite the fact that a number of studies have demonstrated that such programs can positively benefit students, both academically and behaviorally. Implicit bias. Research has shown that as educators, we make abundantly critical observations of students that shape our perceptions based on race, appearance, and other factors. Educators that are in the room. We ignore these biases. When we ignore these biases, this furthers the inequity. We pass those perceptions on to our students, which impacts the way they view themselves. It impacts self-esteem and overall academic performance. Implicit bias among educators drives the way we make decisions about our young people. Decisions like zero-tolerance policies that mandate suspensions, even for minor violations such as talking back or cutting class. We've seen this increase in school suspensions nationally. From 1974, we went from 1.7 million suspensions nationally to over 3 million today. We really began to see this increase in zero-tolerance policies around the 90s. Policies became more commonplace after 1999. Does anybody remember what happened in 1999? What major event happened in this country in 1999? Yes, ma'am. Columbine. The shooting at Columbine High School, mass shooting at Columbine High School. So around the same time, we start to see the police presence in schools begin to increase, school resource officers, as they're called. We start to see more metal detectors in schools, more wanding down of students in schools. And the highest percentage of these officers are found in schools that are considered to be in high poverty neighborhoods. Schools where at least half of the enrollment is made up of non-white students. Essentially, discipline has shifted from in-school administrative discipline to juvenile corrections, law enforcement-based responses. So the experts who are trained to work specifically with young people, those people who have experience in working with adolescents and discipline approaches and classroom management have now outsourced this discipline to people who are trained in self-defense and firearms. Now, there are instances where having police officers in school can actually foster healthy relationships. When I was a kid, officers would come to our school dressed up as Scruff McGruff. Anybody old enough to remember Scruff McGruff, the crime dog? So we would discuss things like tips on stranger danger and like just say no to drugs, kids, and take a bite out of crime, you know? So it was a good experience. It was a fun way to foster healthy relationships. The DARE program, Drug Abuse Resistance Education. Anybody remember DARE? Had the little DARE shirts? Okay. But this has not been the normal trend that we've seen with law enforcement being present in schools. It's more of a law and order thing within our schools. And we know that arrest rates are higher across the board for schools where police officers are present than they are for schools that do not have an officer present. Incarceration is being prioritized over education, over creative subjects like music and art, over counseling services, over nurses, over psychologists, over social services, basically over everything. Our youth are commonly being arrested for petty crimes. They're being routinely brought before a judge and convicted at alarmingly high rates. Someone that is not in my class this semester, has anyone heard of the Kids for Cash scandal? Does anybody remember this Kids for Cash scandal? For those of you who may not be familiar, there was a Pennsylvania judge by the name of Mark Ciavarella. He ran under the Tough on Crime platform in 1995, and then he was reelected again in 2005. Just to give you an idea of the time span that he was in this particular position. So he would go out to various schools and he would talk to students about things like personal responsibility and the ethics of good citizenship, as opposed to restorative practices like counseling or community service. Many of his cases ended up putting young people behind bars. The court found that Ciavarella and another judge accepted $2.7 million in kickbacks from 2 private, for-profit juvenile facilities. So federal criminal charges were filed against him. He was sentenced to 28 years back in 2011. The courts basically rescinded all the guilty pleas for youth that appeared before Ciavarella between 2003 and 2008. Their cases were dismissed with prejudice. In other words, their cases were dismissed permanently, so these claims could not be brought up against them again in court. And their records were expunged. Altogether, there were over 5,000 convictions overturned under this man's judicial authority. So let's take a look at what is happening along the school to prison pipeline a little closer to home. So we've got another question here. Let's see. Youth in Shelby County are transferred to adult court systems at 1/2, twice, or triple the rate of any other county in Tennessee. Nobody thought 1/2. Oh, okay, somebody thought 1/2. Okay. All right. It's about half and half, twice, triple, double. Okay, so the correct answer is triple, for those of you who said triple. Let's see. All right. 901 Shelby Drive, look alive. Drake, if you are listening, we need help, extended help. Our young people could really use your influence here in the city. So we are sending youth to adult court systems at triple the rate of any other county here in the state of Tennessee. So the good news is that short-term school suspensions have went down, but here's the bad news. Expulsions have went up, which essentially means that students have actually missed more days in this last school year, although suspensions decreased. In some cases, expulsions are mandated by law, but for 83% of the expulsions in Shelby County, they were based on a school administrator's discretion. 67% of the expulsions were black boys, although black boys only make up about 38% of the school district. The juvenile court is still engaging in practices that discriminate against black children, even after the Department of Justice has ended its oversight into the court, according to a due process monitor from the actual DOJ. Sending children to adult court increases the chances that a child will take a plea deal. You see what they did there? Who wants to be tried as an adult? If you're 14, 15, I'm an adult, I don't want to be tried as an adult. So it's an intimidation practice. We've also seen in our courts here intimidation towards defense lawyers who tend to disagree with these practices in court and speak out against that. They are in a lot of ways being ostracized. So Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris is hopeful that this can be turned around though by investing in rehabilitation services for children. He's put forth this proposal to build a new juvenile detention center that would provide youth classrooms, recreational areas, and access to social services. So let's send some positive vibes his way. But this is not a news cycle in Shelby County. These are trends that we've seen year after year. When does it end? So we've talked a little bit about the school to prison pipeline. Now let's take a look at the prison to school pipeline. I want to share with you some things I learned in my conversations with people in prison about their educational experiences all the way from grade school up into their correctional education experiences. But before I tell you what I learned, let's do another poll question, and this will be our last poll question for the night. So, which state has the highest incarceration rate? A lot of folks for Louisiana. Per capita incarceration rate, yes, to clarify, per 100,000 folks. All right, and the answer is Oklahoma. Ah, I get a lot of ahs. Okay, so let me explain. Up until last year, Louisiana did have the highest incarceration rate, and they sat there for the longest. In fact, they were named the world's prison capital for a very long time. About 3.5 months ago, they were unseated by the state of Oklahoma by 27 students. By 27 people. So for those of you who said Louisiana, you weren't very far off. And if you spent time listening to me talk about the subject, I tend to talk about Louisiana a great deal. And that is actually where I conducted some of my research. So I talked to men, primarily black men, enrolled in correctional education classes, and I wanted to know what their educational experiences had been like. And this is what I learned. Barriers to education. Now, when I say barriers to education, I'm referring to those factors that prevented students from educational attainment. So there are situational barriers, which are those obstacles that arise from an individual's situation or their environment, all of these external influences. So teachers, family, friends, drugs. Then there are dispositional or internal barriers, those obstacles that we all have experienced and that are related to our attitudes or our self-perception or just our perceptions in general. Things like pride, shame, self-esteem. So teachers, let's talk about that for a second. One student mentioned how he was struggling academically and he recalls not having any support from his teachers. When he was in school, all his teachers used to talk down to him. They had very negative perceptions of him, and they were very vocal about it. They will tell him things like, you're never going to amount to anything. And this really impacted his psyche. He started to have low self-esteem, and ultimately, he ended up dropping out in the 11th grade. Family responsibilities. One student recalls his mother getting very ill when he was just in the 8th grade. He was the oldest son of 3, and so he would have to take on additional responsibilities in the home. So he was helping his sick mom, and he was helping to care for his younger brother and sister. He said that when he got to school, he would be so tired from staying up late to help his mom, doing chores and taking care of his siblings, that he would fall asleep in class. He also needed eyeglasses, but his family could not afford eyeglasses. So he couldn't read, he couldn't see the chalk, he could read, but he couldn't see the chalkboard in class because he couldn't see, so he'd always squint. So based on this behavior, falling asleep, not being able to answer questions about things that are written on the board, his teachers assumed that he was on drugs. And so essentially he ended up getting kicked out of school. Fast forward to now, he's a 53-year-old grandfather who is working on his GED. He noted that he was ashamed because he couldn't read he couldn't read stories to his grandkids because he struggled with literacy. So he decided to go back to school in a lot of ways out of embarrassment. Social life. Another student noted that he started hanging out with the wrong crowd in school. His friends were bad influence. His friends were bad influences. They were major distractors from his education. However, his friends were able to get back on track academically, and they went on to graduate from high school. But he got caught up in what he refers to as the drug life. Not only was he selling drugs as a way of income, he was also using drugs. So ultimately, all of this led to his incarceration and subsequently his dropout at the age of 16. Internal influences. Students indicated that things like pride and self-esteem led to dropout. They were ashamed about their personal academic struggles, and they didn't want to ask for help. In a lot of cases, it's not that the services weren't there. Sometimes they just were too embarrassed to ask for help or additional help, supplemental instruction. Now that they're incarcerated, they're a little bit older, their perspectives have shifted. So if prison is good for anything, it's good for self-reflection. You got a lot of time to self-evaluate. Rehabilitation programs like correctional education are helpful in that they increase the opportunity for students to self-reflect, and that they also have been proven to reduce recidivism rates. So as the school-to-prison pipeline increases, correctional education programs are becoming more and more essential. Unfortunately, we failed these people when they were children in our school systems, but hopefully people like Dr. Stephen Haynes can help make it right through correctional education, higher education in prison programs. So before I close, I want to share with you one last story about someone who I had an opportunity to meet. His name is Stanley, and he was a formerly incarcerated, he is a formerly incarcerated person. He was incarcerated at a relatively young age. He has 3 felony convictions, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for drug trafficking. The prosecuting attorney told the judge that Stanley was a career criminal. I want y'all to remember that word, career. He was a career criminal who was beyond redemption. So this is Dr. Stanley Ricci. He is the executive director of a nonprofit called From Prisons to PhDs. In his career, he's also an endocrinologist scientist, and he serves as an assistant professor at not one, but two world-renowned medical institutions. One is Howard University College of Medicine, the other is Johns Hopkins. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. We just have to continue to work collectively to shine light on these issues and to stand in the gap for those people who have been marginalized. Two sides of the same coin. Y'all, that's my time. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight and joining me in this discussion. Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we have Iris is walking around. If you have questions, we most likely will not be able to get to all of them, but certainly want to get to as many as we can. Here we can start with what we got here. All right, so here's one. It's an excellent question. How do we do the work as educators to help break this cycle, but also not at the same time promote a white savior complex?
Thank you, whoever asked that question. That is an excellent question. I think the first thing you do is like start by asking these kinds of questions, right? Doing your own sort of self-evaluation. A lot of times we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I say work with people who are already doing this kind of work. You don't have to go out and start your own program. Dr. Stephen Haynes had to leave to go and teach a class, but he teaches in a prison, a program that is connected here to Rhodes College. He teaches in a women's prison. He's actually still here, and he might actually be able to share his own personal experience entering into that particular space. But I would just say check your implicit bias at the door. If anybody ever wants to evaluate those things, sometimes these are things that we're not conscious of. Now, there are things that we're conscious of, and we're well aware that we're being discriminatory in a lot of ways, but some things we do unconsciously. Harvard University has a test out there, I think it's implicit associate at harvard.edu. So go out there and test yourself, and they do everything from race to religion to if you discriminate against left-handed people. So that's an excellent question. Thank you, whoever asked that.
All right, next, why do you think students of color are more likely to receive harsher punishments for misbehavior?
I think it has to do with the history of this country. Now, what we're seeing is being referred to as modern day slavery. It's not very much in your face racism. This is a systemic problem. It's an institutional problem that is perpetuated by both black and white people. So yeah, that's my answer.
All right. Next question. You emphasized the importance of education in prison. What issues stand in the way of in-prison education opportunities?
That is an excellent question, whoever asked that. Funding, obviously, is one. Struggling right now. There are a couple of things going on back and forth in the legislation about whether people who are incarcerated should be able to receive Pell money. So funding is the big thing all around. I think that's it. The other thing that I have noticed is that some prisons will say that they're offering a particular education program, or they may have it listed on their website. But what happens is if they've ever offered it one time, meaning even if they offered that class one time in the past 10 years, it goes up on the website. The other challenge is there's not enough classrooms, instructors to go around. So even though they may even be offering a class on a regular basis, there's only a small percentage of people at the prisons who actually get a chance to take those courses. And so there's like a pecking order. The other challenge is sometimes people who are incarcerated get transferred in and out of different institutions. So for those of you who are enrolled at Rhodes, it would be like you leaving here and transferring to a whole other state. You're going to University of Florida, and then you bounce back to UCLA. So it's a little hard to keep up in that way as well. Thank you.
How does homelessness play a role in this pipeline?
Well, students who are experiencing homeless are also more likely to be suspended as well. We see that in the data all the time.
All right. Are there any organizations in Shelby County currently working to address this cycle?
Absolutely. I'm not going to try to stand up here and read all of them off or try to name all of them because I'm sure I will miss them, but I'm going to go ahead and roll off the ones that stand out to me immediately. Memphis Restorative Justice Coalition, JIF, Juvenile Interfaith. There's another F, I can't remember what that is, but they're working with young people. Knowledge Quest is working with young people. Vance Avenue Youth Development Center is working with young people. Just City 901 is tackling issues as well from that route. And Keepers of 306, Black Millennials, the whole Black Millennial movement, Black Millennial Political Convention, Black Millennials for Flint. Those are all the ones that come to mind now.
All right. This question is specifically about preschool suspensions. How can teachers be more understanding of the kinds of baggage that very young children bring to school in ways that prevent a pattern of suspensions?
That is an excellent question. Again, always start with checking your own biases at the door, getting more teacher training, more professional development in understanding what people are going through, and also understanding that it's not always up to you to be the person to help that child. Maybe you need to get them to somebody else who can actually help them in their particular case.
Couple more questions here. What effect do you think the privatization of prisons has had on this system?
Oh, huge. The Kids for Cash scandal, for example, where people are making money. There's an old rule whenever you're investigating something, investigating a crime, and you want to find out who done it, and it's follow the money. Always follow the money. If you want to know why certain decisions are being made, why certain laws are into effect, why certain people are being impacted by this, that is follow the money. There is big business. Prisons have become big business. So if you own a prison and you're making money off of that prison, it is more beneficial for you to have more bodies. And the younger, the better, right? Very similar to slavery.
All right, just a couple more here. I know that there are lots of questions that were in the queue, but what kinds of educational experiences did the presently and formerly incarcerated folks that you work with, or express the desire for in terms of subjects or topics or credentials?
Ironically, a lot of them were actually interested in business. They were interested in owning their own businesses. One person was interested in healthcare. He wanted to be a nurse. Can't remember now. I have to go back and look at the data, but I know one person wanted to open their own rehabilitation center to help people like him, to help folks get off drugs and come off the street.
All right. Do you think the solution is putting more funding into detention centers for education, or funding education instead of detention? So funding prison education, I think that's what, funding like prison education programs, or funding education rather than funding prison.
That's a tough question because we're in a position now where we've got so many people in the incarceration system. It would help to put more money into prisons. However, we have young people that we're trying to prevent from going through this vicious cycle again. So if I had to choose, I would say more money into the current educational system for people who are 3, 4, K through 12 age kids.
Well, I know we didn't get to everybody's question, but we obviously will hopefully have more time for conversation informally. Before everybody heads out, those of you, I know there are a lot of folks tonight, which is so amazing, folks who are not necessarily regulars on campus. It's so wonderful to see y'all. But one of the things that's very difficult about roads, including for those of us here every day, is how to get out of here when some of the gates are closed. The gate that many of you may have come in, the Phillips Lake gate, I believe is closed now. It's closed. And there are exit signs that will point you to the main gate. So the gate that will actually let you out of here. We don't need to keep you here all night. Please, once again, join me in thanking Professor Stephen Haynes.